Hello, and welcome back to a new Kerbal Space Program video. Today, in the previous video, I've more or less demonstrated a few of the newest parts in the Breaking Ground DLC, and for all the features to kind of be enabled, we had to start a new save. Thus, we have none of the previous infrastructures that we have created in our previous save, so we have to build these up again. And in today's launch, well, except the first part here, we can see me tinkling around with some of the new parts, which should have actually been there to represent a special, well, not a special, but just a landing-like construction that was a fin at the same time, and later on being able to retract and deploy them for the landing of the booster, since we will try to land the booster. You know, like reusable Falcon 9 style. Well, not quite Falcon 9 obviously, but you get what I mean. But it looked like the servo motors were not strong enough to bring the entire legs up, so kind of I still went along with it. And by the way, before I forget to mention it, since we have to build up all of our new infrastructure, we have to build up a new communications array as well, and this is what we are going to do today. We'll build up a communications array in order to have more or less coverage of the entire, well, obviously of the entire Kerbal system, and later on, of course, to enable long-range communication with probes way beyond Kerbal. So that's why we have this big stage there with, what are there, 5 satellites with the biggest relay dish we have, and we will first of all obviously send this payload into an orbit, as you can see now, with a rather high apoapsis. And for the booster stage, which was still on a suborbital trajectory, is now on its return trip, and like you can see here, it has some regular air brakes, and we have some of the new DLC parts or hinges that are kind of meant to act like even bigger air brakes, so those wing surfaces were folded up during the takeoff, and now on landing we're trying to bring them down as much as we can, but obviously they are against the airflow, so it's kind of hard for them to open up. However, as we get slower and slower, they were able to be fully deployed, as you can see right now. And at this point I'm still trying to figure out why the landing legs are not really working the way they are supposed to be, and now they are more or less fixed, I guess, in the totally opposite position of the way they were at launch. But even as you can see here, I'm playing around with the target angle. They still don't deploy the way I want them to deploy. So that's kind of a sad thing, and the mechanism is not quite working the way it was supposed to be. So my idea right now is that the landing lags and everything was just too heavy for the medium alligator clamps, since these are the medium ones, to move around, even though I'm very surprised, since that's literally just one wing piece, the landing lags, and one of the medium-sized structural octagonal strut thing, you know, like the cubic strut, but just a bigger version of it. Okay, but then I decided, yeah, let's try and land it the old-fashioned way, but as you can see here, it didn't go quite according to plan. We started to wobble around quite a lot, and yes, you can see that landing this thing is not quite that well. Actually, I just suck at landing big boosters. That's literally it. So yeah, anyways, well, you can enjoy me trying to land this thing, and I can tell you already it's not going to work. Let's go into something else. I'd like to ask you to comment me on next mission down below, or just any sort of, any sort of wish that you want me to do in a future video. Okay, so since you can obviously see that the booster did not land the way it was supposed to be, however, that's not the main part of our mission, and now we jump forward to the main craft. Yes, exactly. So I raised the apoapsis even higher of this craft, and now we can start deploying our satellites. Now I'll be in the first deployment of the deployment of the first satellite will be covered a bit more in detail. All the following satellites will be just thrown out in a more rapid fashion. So since we're now at the first one, I'm going to quickly brush over the, well, not the aesthetics. So this satellite has a fuel tank, battery, even more fuel tanks for RCS controls, and an antenna, obviously, with a probe core. But that's not what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say is we have now in very eccentric orbit with one apoapsis rather high at our target altitude, and I did not go for any sort of Cuban synchronous orbit or something like that, even though that might actually be a pretty decent idea as well. I just went for a rather high orbit so that the time of the orbit where Cuban is kind of blocking some sort of signal from any outside source is kind of not too much, and then we go just circularize this orbit into a circular orbit right now, and then we just leave this satellite there. The following satellites should be in theory on the same orbital plane, same orbital time, so that they will always be the same separation between each other. They have the same separation. However, since I don't want to spend too much time on doing these orbits perfectly and so on and so forth, I'm just throwing these satellites, so right now the second one, and approximately at the same time, or at the same orbit or apoapsis of the main craft at the moment, and just throwing them into more or less the same orbit. They all definitely drift apart or drift closer to each other, but that shouldn't be too big of an issue, since we first of all will have multiple of these satellites, and one of them will always be able to receive the signal from a craft outside of line of sight of the other two satellites on this orbital plane. So right now we're throwing in the third one, and you can see at the moment they are not perfectly in sync, but just in a few passes they will be in sync. But right now we will just skip again to the main craft. We're performing an inclination change. Since we still have 2 more satellites left, I decided to slap these 2 on into an polar orbit, so that even if something is more or less obstructed or something like that, we have still a secondary system. Even though only 2 satellites would not be enough for a perfect system, however, with all those 5 satellites in orbit, and probably later on, once we start constructing space stations, moon space stations, maybe even science outposts on the moon and on Minmus, everything will be able to talk to each other and to relay the signals from one place to another, and thus creating a totally redundant system like we had in the last save file. Speaking of the last save file, in the last save file I actually did as well a communications array build-up mission. However, I kind of forgot to record. There are some issues were there, so you can't find it on my channel, which is kind of sad, but since I think the last time I did a slightly better job in getting everything more or less into the same orbit and so on and so forth. But anyways, this should be more or less enough for today's, well, it's a rather short mission obviously, but this should be enough for our first part in building up enough infrastructure to enable long distance travel. And since we still have this main stage and we had more than enough fuel, decided to let's deorbit it so that we can keep the orbital debris to, well, not too big, kind of keep the issue a little bit in check. Now we're just going to fast forward since there's nothing really left to say, and I hope you have enjoyed this rather short video and more or less just quick update on the save file, more or less. And yeah, so thank you guys very much for watching, and until next time, Spaceship signing out. And don't forget to leave your mission suggestion in the comments down below.